I don't know if any of you in this room live with a mental illness, but for those of us that do, it is a nightmare every day of our life. I still wake up in the morning with intrusive thoughts. I still know that most of my days are not going to be filled with peace and joy and happiness. They're often filled with struggle. They're also filled with triumph and adversity. And so we kept looking because my parents, thank God, didn't buy that. They didn't buy the fact that they couldn't find somebody who could help me. I still question why. When you're a parent and you're going to the best professionals in the city, or who are supposed to be, and they're telling you things as though they're fact, I still can't comprehend why they didn't just believe them. Why they didn't give up and accept a certain life for me, except that I think they just, for some reason, knew better. And so they kept searching and searching. The problem with that was that time continued to go on. And a year or two passed, and my OCD in my life had become completely and utterly debilitated and consumed by my mental illness. Every moment of every day was filled with an intrusive thought followed by a repetitive ritual. At this time, I was taking 6 to 8 hour showers, and we didn't have tankless water heaters back then, so you're out of hot water, and I would be shaking and crying and freezing cold in the corner of my parents' shower, because it was the only shower that wasn't contaminated in my house at the time. By this point, I was about 14 years old, and my mom would have to come into the shower, physically pull me out, and get me dressed. Now, the humility or trying to understand what it's like when you're a 14-year-old kid who's physically capable of taking a quick shower, getting ready on your own, dressing yourself, engaging in everyday activity, yet mentally it stops you from doing those things. The humility it takes, or that you're faced with, when your parent is having to take you out of the shower at that age, get you dressed, do everything for you as if you can't do it for yourself. It's all-consuming. It's devastating, and it's lonely. And as time goes on and your illness gets worse, and you're told by the best professionals that there's not help for you, you're not going to get better, what do you have to live for? Not much, if anything. I woke up every day of my life praying and hoping that it would be my last, and I begged my family members every single day to take my life. I explained to them that if they took my life, I had very strong Christian faith and feared that if I took my own, I might not go to heaven. And so I feared and thought that if they took my life for me, they would be able to still be forgiven and ask for forgiveness, and it would be okay. I'd be out of my misery. They would no longer be burdened by my illness, and everything would work out. You see, not only did I struggle with this mental illness that I hated, I wanted nothing to do with, but I watched my mom and my sister and my dad fall apart from a disease I didn't want. And the guilt and the shame that you have to deal with, feeling like and knowing that you're a burden to the people you love most, is pretty hard to swallow. And so my OCD continued to get worse because people continued to not help me. I remember going to a practitioner in Houston, and we would do things like play the game of life and play different board games, and I would cross the bridge, and she would say, "So how does that make you feel?" I'd be like, "I don't know. How does it make you feel? Like I'm crossing a bridge in a board game. There's nothing here for me." And I remember... confusing to me, but still is. I'm still trying to process and understand that a lot of years later, but I'll get it eventually. So I I got finally diagnosed with OCD. And I remember when I was diagnosed, I was told those same things. And I'll never forget a practitioner saying, well, how does it feel to have a diagnosis? A lot of people feel freed or good knowing that there's a name for their struggling, knowing that there's a diagnosis for what they're going through, and that other people may be struggling with the same thing. And I remember being so confused. Because I was a little bit of a smart aleck. So my response to this therapist was, help me understand your question. You're asking me how it feels to have a diagnosis of OCD while simultaneousally telling me that there's not help available and I'm never going to get better. I don't know, let's take a wild guess. It doesn't feel very good. But that's what happens is these practitioners and people would give you this glimpse, this little light that, oh, there's a diagnosis. Or, oh, let me work with you and you should come to therapy with me. And so you would kind of get your hopes up that, oh my gosh, maybe this is the person that can make a difference. But time after time again, when they don't make a difference, and in fact you keep getting worse, you stop believing that. You stop caring. And you lose all hope that you once had. Not just hope that you won't have a mental illness, but hope, dreams, and aspirations. You start to forget the person that you were, the things that you wanted to do with your life. And you accept this life of misery. Because it feels like it's all you have. As my OCD got worse, I have a lot of OCD around scrupulosity, which is the religious form of OCD. And so I found different things wrong with most numbers. I would find some sort of bad correlation, most of them all centering and being around the number 666, being the number of the devil, and feeling like any iteration of that, or doing anything in a multiple or a dividend meant something bad might happen or that it was blasphemous. And so I slowly found things wrong with every number, and I stopped at the number 42. It makes no sense because 4 plus 2 is 6, and that is one of the worst number for me in the book. And so it doesn't make sense, but again, we don't try to make sense through an irrational disorder. The reason I stopped at the number 42 was because at the time it was my mom's age. And I felt like since she had a bad age, for some reason, if I did things in multiple of 42, it was going to even out and make her not have a bad number currently. I don't know. So every day, everything I did 42 times. Let's just imagine that. I would wake up in the morning. I would sit up and down 42 times. I would move my body to the side 42 times. I would take my first step with my first leg 42 times, and then my second. And it would be an hour before I could make it to my bathroom. By this time, you're already sweating and exhausted and wanting the day to be over, and it has only just begun. So I would get to my sink, and I would turn the sink faucet on 42 times, get 42 pumps of soap, rinse my hands off 42 times, turn the faucet back off 42 times, and then my mind told me that that was one set, and I should do 42 sets of 42. So as you can imagine, when I say every moment of every day was incapacitated by my illness, I don't mean just mentally, I mean literally. Thank God my parents happened to be business owners, and my mom could take me to work with her every day or stay home with me as needed. I was certainly unsafe at the time, home alone. I was very suicidal and not wanting to be alive, and certainly not able to function. And so she became my full-time caretaker. And what would happen is my mom would see every glimpse, every piece, every portion of my illness every day. And my sister saw most of it as well. She was there and she was present. My brother at the time had gone off to college and at UNT in Dallas, so he wasn't home as often. And my dad, back to his slogan, was at work. And so one night my mom was devastated and upset about what was going on and what was happening. And she tried to talk to my dad about it, and his response was, Linda, I'm starting to wonder if you might be the one who needs some help, because I think Liz is fine. You see, when my dad got home, I was able to kind of look at him, say hi, and engage in some normal functioning that appeared to be okay, and he didn't see my illness because I was ashamed and I was scared. So there were very few people and very few places that I would engage in these rituals and feel comfortable enough to show them my vulnerabilities. Now with time, my dad couldn't not see it anymore. It started to take over. But the reality is that the caregivers, the ones who are entrenched, the ones who are in the middle of this illness, that's who sees it the most. Those are who are most impacted. My mom and my sister will never question the validity of my illness. Will never wonder how much OCD can make someone struggle. They, to this day, will never miss a phone from me without a prolonged period of time. You see, every day somebody with a mental illness is that close to a relapse. And so we kept searching for care. By the time I was 15, I was no longer going to school. I wasn't really living at my house. I was staying at one of my best friend's house most of the time because every room in our home had become contaminated, and I couldn't function or live in my house. And surprisingly, what would happen is when I would go to my friend's house, although I was still calling my mom all the time for reassurance and doing these rituals, my OCD was a little bit better because I wasn't close enough to my best friend's dad and some of her siblings that I wasn't going to do the same rituals and engage in the same behavior. And so it didn't mean I wasn't struggling and I wasn't anxious, but I wasn't as comfortable, and so for me it was a little bit of a cushion. My parents continued to search for help and had no idea what to do. A couple years prior, my mom had opened a Sports Illustrated magazine to read. There was a certain, the Houston Rockets used to actually practice at our facility in Houston, and there was a Chronicle writer who would always come up to the facility and talk to my mom, and so she had gotten a Sports Illustrated article in the mail, and she saw one of his pieces, and she thought, oh, I'll read this to see what he does and see his work. And she opened up the Sports Illustrated piece, and it was about a young man at the time who was a Wisconsin basketball player who had severe OCD. And as she started reading this article, all she could think is, this is Liz. He was doing things like spending hours cleaning bathroom tiles and making sure all the water was picked up and that there wasn't anything wet left so that nobody could slip and get hurt, and all of these different rituals. And so my mom used her connections that she had and called a basketball player who we had known from Houston and said, Sam, I need Liz to meet this guy. Sam was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks at the time, and so he happened to arrange a meeting. My mom and I flew up to Wisconsin, and we went to a basketball game, and I met this individual. And I was really angry at the time. I was really mad at the world. I was really confused on what I had done to deserve this, why this had to be the outcome of my life and my story. And so I probably wasn't the friendliest, nicest 13, 14-year-old. But for the first time, I met somebody else who had an illness like mine. I met somebody else who I could relate to on a level different than any level I could relate to anyone else on. And so we went back home and kept searching for care, and I think these are all serendipitous events, but my dad opened the Houston Chronicle one day, and when he opened the Chronicle, he saw a section about the Menninger Clinic potentially coming to Houston. So he kept reading and started to inquire about what is the Menninger Clinic and what do they do, and he read in a small little section that they had an OCD program. And so immediately he picked up the phone and was making phone calls and trying to figure out what that meant, what that looked like, and who they can help, and if that might be something that would help me. And so pretty quickly I was doing an assessment with a provider, Dr. Joyce Davidson, who was commuting at the time between Topeka, Kansas, which is where Menninger was, and Houston, where they were going to eventually move to. And she did an assessment and quickly let my parents know that, my OCD was very severe and was not the type of OCD that could be treated on an outpatient stance. So my parents on their own started to make plans and started to develop an intervention to take me to Menninger. My mom was scared to death. She was so scared that she would lose me forever. She didn't know what it would be like to send your kid to a mental institution. She didn't know what that meant, what to expect, and so that fear of losing me forever started to dictate her actions. My mom would say things like, well, I'll send her after Thanksgiving because I want her to be home with family. Well, now Christmas is coming up, so she should get to have Christmas with us. And her birthday's in February, so we should definitely let her have her birthday here in Houston. And slowly there was reason after reason she didn't send me. But the reality is and was that the Liz that stood in front of her wasn't the Liz she gave birth to. She had already lost me. I was gone from my mental illness. There was no part of me left that you could see that was me. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I didn't have dreams. I didn't have ambitions. I didn't even understand what it would look like to have a life one day or have a job. I didn't think that was possible. I lost most of my friends, started to withdraw at least from most of my friendships and relationships, and slowly she saw me dwindle away in front of her. And so she made the decision that after my birthday there would be no more excuses and she would take that risk and send me to Menninger. My mom talks about that decision and that day as being the hardest day of her life because she thought this could be the end point. This could be the point where she never talks to me again. This can be the point where she no longer trusts me and where she feels like we're giving up on her. And that was the last thing my family ever wanted. They, obviously I felt like I was a huge burden, and I'm sure I was to an extent, but to them, I was their child. They wanted to get me well. My dad's mom, who recently passed away, struggled her whole life with depression, and she was in and out of treatment centers in Dallas, and my dad's mentality, he'll tell you, growing up was tough it up. Get over it. And so when I first got sick, my dad's mentality and answer was, we'll fix it. No problem. Little did he know.